Hi, folks. You're all very welcome back to the Celtic Soul Podcast. My guest on the show today is Ciaran Kenny from Naomh Padraig Celtic Supporters Club. We'll be talking all things Celtic and looking ahead to the Hearts game tomorrow and Utrecht on Thursday. Two massive games coming up for Celtic. A big shout out to Owen down in Ottawa Shore Car Sales in Dundalk for sponsoring this episode of the podcast and indeed for his continued support of the Fanzine over many seasons. Thanks very much, Owen. Top man. If you want to know what we're all about, visit celticfanzine.com. If you would like to sponsor an episode, email us at info@celticfanzine.com, and you can also contact us across our social media platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on audio, please hit the follow button. And it's rang that, yes, it all started with more than 90 minutes. Issue 140 is now on sale. You can get the digital and also the print copy. You can order it on our website, celticfanzine.com, and we appreciate all your continued support. Enjoy the podcast. Ciaran Kenny, you're very welcome back to the Celtic Soul Podcast. It's been a long time since you've been on the show, but we've had many conversations. Ciaran is one of the stalwarts of the Naomh Padraig Celtic Supporters Club bus, which passes through my hometown and used to pick me up many years ago. And it still goes through my hometown about the same time as I'm finishing in the cross and heading home for a couple of hours, Kip, before I catch a flight. Ciaran, the bus is still going strong.
It is indeed, Andrew. And I remember, I think last I was speaking to you, we were in COVID times, and I said to you, you make yourself one promise, relive your youth at least once a season and jump back on board. So I'm going to hold you to that promise yet. We've a few games yet between now and hopefully a positive end of the season. So there's a few opportunities for you down the road. But yeah, we're very much strong. We've a bus for every home game. As has been there, we're not a million miles off, would you believe, the club's 40th anniversary, how the years go by. So yeah, thankfully, a good few stalwarts, young and old, on board the chariot every week to paradise.
Incredible. Where did the years go? 40, almost 40 years. And I remember those early advertisements in the Evening Herald to join the club.
Yeah. If you remember looking back, there used to be, I often think of the ones that Jim Greenan's crowd, obviously, in Monaghan are a long time around. The Tribes when would have been the Costello brothers would have been advertised in the Herald at the time. The Middle Leinster CSC, ourselves, then obviously yourselves in St. Margaret's. And it's great to see so many Tribe and CSCs throughout the country still. Obviously, the bus and the chariot is a slightly longer stretch for a few. It's probably an acquired taste, but it is great to see. I often sort of romantically think that the way the immigrants started the club over land and sea, that we still travel that way to paradise. So it's something I've thoroughly enjoyed and hopefully will for many years to come.
Yeah, and the flag is for there for all to see at every home game in the stadium. Yeah, you mentioned a couple of people there. Actually, Frank is in the Galway Celtic Supporters Club now, Frank Costello, and obviously started from the Tribesmen, and he's actually issue 140, the fanzine, is out at the moment. It's arrived from the printers, and obviously the digital copy goes out to all the Celtic Supporters Club that support it. So that's Frank was done an interview with Frank, and then you mentioned Mid Leinster. I bumped into Fra in the airport coming home from, what was the last home game?
Dundee United, maybe, was it last week?
Yeah, Martin's
Yeah.
first game back. I bumped into Fra in the airport and we had a great chat. And then obviously I'm in contact with the St. Margaret's boys all the time. So yeah, a lot of we're all older,
There we are, yeah.
less hair, beer bellies, but you know, I don't think we change a thing from because of the people that we've met. You know, football is they say it's a results business, but you know, during some bad times, we've met some great people, and as Hilly often commented, I preferred it when we were shit. The crack was better. Well, I tell you one thing, we were poor under Nancy, and you would never want to go back to those days. But it's like we're reminiscing here about supporters clubs and adverts in the Evening Herald at a time when you just have to switch your phone on and you're bombarded by Celtic or whatever your interest is. But when you think back, when Martin O'Neill came in the first time, packed boats, it was the HSS at the time, there was such a buzz when O'Neill was here the first time. Who didn't want to go to see Henrik Larsson? These players knew, obviously the club and football has moved on a lot. The English Premier League has gone one way with, owners from Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the money that's in it. And then obviously Scottish football has gone backwards probably since 2004 maybe, when up to then Rangers had a really strong team, Celtic had a really strong team. There was kind of players coming up from the Premier League. They're long gone now. But with Martin back now and you know, getting the best out of an average squad, a weakened squad, and he's calling out for signings as everyone else is. But he's just got something, hasn't he?
Yeah, you touched on when he first signed, and I remember writing a piece for the Fanzine a number of years ago on that summer. I'll never forget the 1st of June 2000. And if people remember the old ITV page, 527 was the Celtic page, and he used to update it every 15 minutes. And I rang my father, I was in a summer job, I rang him every 10 minutes. Was there any update, anything at all? That the excitement was hard to articulate on the back of having lost that league by 21 points to Rangers. I'll never forget the first home game we played Motherwell. Petrov scored, I think, and Chris Sutton actually got sent off that day. And it is genuinely very hard to articulate that sense of excitement. O'Neill would have been a pundit that year for the Euros, which were in, I think, Holland and Belgium on BBC. And we all just tuned in for the halftime commentary. Nobody cared about the football. It's what was Martin saying? And it was, in some sense, with Martin O'Neill coming back, there's probably a sense for some of us who were privileged enough to witness that time, a little bit of reliving our youth. I was beside Jim Green and I touched on at Hampden in November, and he says, "This is just bizarre." He says, "We're playing Rangers here at Hampden, a League Cup semi-final, and Martin O'Neill is in the dugout." It's incredible to think all those years on, and he's still able to get a tune out of these players, because you touched on that 6 or so weeks with Nancy, and if we could wipe it out completely, it was horrific. It has ripped the soul out of the club. You could argue with on top of obviously all the off-field stuff that has been touched on at length. I just hope that Martin has come in time and that the damage hasn't been done in relation to those 6 or 7 weeks where Nancy was involved, because like where we are at now in relation to a league title race, we are right in the midst of it. And I just wonder, had O'Neill stayed on, I think we maybe just would have had a little bit of a cushion at that stage. And certainly it's a cushion we don't have. And we're heading into a game tomorrow at Tynecastle where we just cannot afford any slip-ups.
Yeah, it's a massive game, Ciaran. Back when Martin was here the first time, you could actually get tickets for Tynecastle. Yeah. It's a tight ground. I remember speaking to William McStay, and he was saying about, bricks and bottles being thrown, and he says, and that was only at the playoffs. So it is one of them grounds. And Martin said it yesterday at his press conference that after Ibrox, it's probably the wildest, we'll say, as for as an away team going, because the fans are so close to the players, so close to the pitch. But our allocation has been shattered for a lot of grounds, but Tynecastle is just now. There's an argument for them, because that the top of the league, they're flying. The fans want to get back in. It's like everything, they'll have it's like every club, when you're doing well, everyone wants to be part of it. But it's ripping like that. That will be a good advertising for Scottish football tomorrow. But when you go to other grounds and you see empty seats, it's just like it's not a product you want to be selling outside of Scotland. I'm sure Sky are going, we've empty seats here, and yet, there's no pressure on the clubs to open up more of the stadium and let people go and watch football.
Yeah, you're right. And you touched on the allocation. And let's be clear, the allocation isn't cut because Hearts are doing well. This allocation has been in place the last number of years now, when we have seen Tynecastle half empty. And like, some of my greatest memories are younger self going off to Tynecastle. I will never forget the night Lennon was attacked, and the atmosphere in the Roseburn stand that night. I often think it was probably the one of the most hostile atmospheres I was ever at a game. And it really saddens me that younger guys coming through now who want to say, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to see the Celtic coming away. They'll not get those opportunities. And like, it's decimating supporters clubs in Scotland. I've no doubts about that. My memories are going with the great people at the Denison #1 from the wee man's over to Tynecastle and back again. And I touched on a great friend of mine, Billy Melville, has missed probably 4 or 5 domestic home games, and probably since Love Street, which I believe in '86, and he won't have a ticket there tomorrow, and that's wrong. It's heartbreaking to see incredible Celtic men who give their lives to the club not in a position to go tomorrow. And I would be far more comfortable if we had consistently seen a sold out Tynecastle like what we see tomorrow. But the reality is we haven't seen that. We have seen a half Roseburn stand full of Celtic fans, with large parts of the rest of the ground empty. I know a few friends of mine who've often gone in incognito into the home end. I'm not sure I could do that myself. But it's terrible that that's the way football has gone. And from a product perspective and from selling a product, we already are in a situation where we have 3 plastic pitches. We look at Falkirk's ground with 3 ends. Some of it just looks amateurish. And I'm going to come from the perspective maybe of being somebody in Dublin heavily involved in a CSC, where most of the young people we see coming through now are generally from what we would say Celtic-minded traditional families. Very few kids, because of the lack of awareness often, are deciding Celtic's my team if they're not exposed to the club. And often what they're seeing can be perceived to be a little bit tin pot at 12 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, empty grounds, plastic pitches, poor stadiums. The reality is very, very few of our home games are televised out with derby games. And when you want to sell a product and give people a proper sense, because let's be clear, like there's something Scottish football had that's wonderfully unique, that's so bereft in so many other places. It still has a soul, but I think so much of that advertised doesn't pick up on that. Thankfully, we will get it tomorrow at Tynecastle, but unfortunately, I think that has been, a case of it's not so seldom that we have had in the past where we have had half empty stadiums. But listen, hopefully we get the job tomorrow, maybe get full allocations down the road and we see maybe a return to what we would have known as the once normal many years gone by.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath, but we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot as well at Celtic Park. The ban on the Green Brigade is, if there was talks going on, no, I think my gut thing is that they want, and the next people that'll come after be the Bhoys. They don't want that type of fan in the ground. They want customers who are going to go into the superstore, spend a couple of quid, buy a pie, sit there, clap when we score. But like, let's be honest, we've spoken about this before, and Michael Pringle, who's a regular on the podcast, has addressed it as well. We came off the back of an absolutely fantastic night in Rotterdam. One of the best away trips I was on in Europe in years, apart from the cold. It was an incredible performance where we kind of rolled back the years for that kind of atmosphere and crack. And even before the game, there was no expectation. The expectation was low before the game, but it was incredible. The atmosphere was brilliant. But what was missing that night was the Feyenoord fans. There was one whole stand empty because they've had fans banned, right? So for me, that was the only letdown of the experience. The result was brilliant. The performance, they dug in, they got the result. Martin O'Neill, like, we love him, and but then they get rid of Martin, and then we have the Roma game, which I can't remember a worse night in Europe or any night game under the lights in Celtic Park. It was dire.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I was fortunate enough too. I was in Rotterdam and it was incredible. And again, we touched on that sense of rekindling your youth. There was so much echoes of that famous night in Amsterdam 24 years ago when we beat Ajax and the same score and everything that went with it. And even previous to the Roma game, you come back, we have a top of the table clash against Hearts. And it was soulless that Sunday afternoon. The only thing worse than the game itself probably was the weather that day. If I remember, it absolutely poured down. I had my young daughter over at the Roma game that day. Now, we had a difficult trip with ferries cancelled. It was 31 hours, would you believe, Andrew, door to door. We were from myself, and she's only a young girl, taking her out of school. I was shot. And it was just soulless. I would echo that. In over 30 years of European football, I would unquestionably say it was my worst night. It was one of my all-time Celtic lows, if I'm very honest. I left the ground that night and I just thought, this is what we've become. I looked around and the game was dead on off the field. There was a silence. Celtic Park was full that night. The only thing we could hear was the Roma fans. The tiredness that day, to indulge me for a moment, on the Friday we got home after no sleep. I had to bring the kids to Santa Claus. The only thing I was asking for was some sleep. A couple of hours later, it seemed we were up again for the League Cup final, and that was another difficult day at the office. So I would say that week as a whole was one of the poorest, worst Celtic weeks I'd experienced in many, many, many years. And like, we pride ourselves in European football. The very DNA of the club is embedded in European football. European nights is the one thing, people talk about a European night at Celtic Park. And please, hopefully we never have a repeat of that Roma game, because it was soulless. And you touched on it at the beginning. in order for things to change, we need to see an end to the collective punishment that's happened with the Green Brigade. We need a return to what we would see as those European nights, get the place rocking. It's not rocket science what needs to happen. Unfortunately, the silence in relation to the board, as has been from the start of the season, is deafening. But unless there is stark change, I would have a concern in relation to what the future atmosphere of Celtic Park looks like in a far more sanitised environment without the ultras groups.
Yeah, they certainly bring noise, colour. You know, some of the tifos have been incredible.
Yeah.
You know, we go back to that famous night when we beat Barcelona. You know, like the club were happy to take pictures and frame them and sell them in the shop. You know, but that was completely fan funded. You know, and that was instigated by the Green Brigade. That was their members, and what a way to celebrate. You know, our birthday. You know, this great club's birthday. But so we had the Roma game, and it was such a disappointment. Utrecht next week, you know, has all the makings of being completely different. You know, it's one of them games that it should sell out. It would have been like if we were out of the competition going into that game, it would have been just like playing a pre-season friendly, and the atmosphere would have been like Roma, even with O'Neill back. But now, you know, after like Bologna the other night we got an incredible start. You know, sending off, and then you know, to go 2-0 in at half time, and then it was backs against the wall stuff in the second half. And, you know, you have to hand it to Austin Trusty, who's, you know, he's I remember when he got dropped after the St. Johnson game in Perth, he was fucking terrible that night. And then you see a player who he put his body on the line the other night, and Scales beside him, who couldn't get he couldn't get into, you know, Nancy's team at the end. He was coming on for 5-minute cameo roles when the game was done and dusted. You know, you see these two solid defenders, not the greatest defenders in the world, but when you have people, you know, over the years we've always had players who, like, you know, for every Paul McStay you have a Peter Grant, and Peter Grant would have gave his heart and soul for Celtic. And when you see Trusty and Scales playing like that, it gives you, you know, we know we're not going to win a European trophy, but that gives you so much hope in those 90 minutes that these players are out there and they're giving their all for us. And as fans, you know, we want to give it back, but give us the opportunity. Give all the fans the opportunity. Don't collectively ban people. You know, they've banned the media, the Celtic fan media. It doesn't bother me, Ciaran. We only got in when Ange was there anyway. It's not a big thing. You know, I've been writing about Celtic for 25 years. It's not going to change that. You know, let me into a press conference isn't going to butter me up. You know, I ain't going to, you know, maybe like I can't come on here and analyse a game because I'm not a UEFA coach. You know, I'd love to have that, but I can't. What I can tell is the fans' experience and the passion that the fans have. And because I travel to all the games, you do get that setting, the conversation, like in the airport or on a boat. And I think that, you know, like, the people only got home late last night from Bologna, you know. If they're lucky enough, they'll be in Tynecastle on Sunday, you know. The commitment by people to go to Celtic. And I just don't think when Ross Dermott read out that statement, I was going, this is a guy from my country who, you know, was born not far from me, was born not far from you. So how the fuck can he be so different to us? How can he not see what we see? You know, no matter how much money you have, or silver or gold spoon in your mouth, surely you're educated. You have you might have a sense of entitlement, but you still should know this is wrong.
Yeah, it's probably, my guess is it's the echo chamber they surround themselves in, you would have to imagine. But what I'm amazed at is that we touched on that Roma game, but how anyone at that ground that night can't look and go, right, this needs to change, because that was so far removed from a European game. I compared it to the famous time the previous team from Rome came to Celtic Park. If you remember that Lazio night in 2019, when Julian got the very late winner, and it was and it was Europa League night too. That was an important factor to make. It wasn't a Champions League night; it was Europa League night too, and that was just a night that will live with me forever. I was with my dad that night, and it was just one of those incredible European nights. And how anyone cannot look and say, right, something needs to change here. Because one thing we do have as a fan base, when I bring lots of kids over from Dublin, and maybe kids that young people and older people that haven't been exposed to Celtic, Yeah, some of the football we have in the park can be great. Yeah, the ground can look well and all that goes with it. But it's the fan base is what lingers. There's that old line in life, I don't remember what you said, I don't remember what you did, but I remember how you made me feel. And it's that sense of feeling at Celtic Park where people walk out and they go, wow, that was incredible. And win, lose or draw, that was incredible. And that's what I'm really concerned we are going to lose going forward, because we have something very, very unique at Celtic Park, but that could change very, very quickly. And in any walk of life, you cannot have collective punishment. There is an adequate judicial system in anywhere where if there's a crime that's taken place, and I'm referencing the so-called incident that people are talking about that took place at the Falkirk game earlier in the season, that will be that will be addressed in the adequate. You cannot have collective punishment in a way that's been dealt with, and it has been outlined by the board that they will be given finances back pro rata to games being missed. So they're openly acknowledging too that this decision has been taken at the financial cost of the club. And let's be very blunt, who funds the club? We do. We are Celtic. And it's a very small piece, but I often get frustrated when people make references to Celtic have decided to do this or Celtic have released this. The PLC have done that, or the board have done that. We are Celtic, and no matter Ross Desmond, Dermot Desmond, they're not Celtic. Celtic is the buses and the boats and the people leaving for Tynecastle on Sunday morning, and people giving their lives who keep all their annual leave days for European away games, for home games, you name it. That's Celtic, and that will always be Celtic, no matter what those of the PLC want to believe otherwise. And I think sometimes our framing and our language is important around that piece.
Yeah, I Jackie McNamara on the podcast earlier in the week, and Jackie addressed, the fans, and he echoed everything you've said there. He said the fans pay their money. They're not entitled. He said we want to see our team progress, and he says, history is history, and he said my time at Celtic is in the history books. You got to see your team moving forward, and that's in all aspects. There hasn't been much done to the stadium since Fergus left. Okay, we've upgraded the training pitches and we've moved out to Lennoxtown as well. But it's okay saying, yeah, look how well we do in the transfer market. Look at our model. We brought in Van Dijk and we sold him, and we brought in Wanyama and we sold him. And we brought in all these players. We moved them on, and players do look at Celtic as a stepping stone, and what a place to come, as a stepping stone. But I think, as a collective at the moment, we're not asking for, a Maradona or a Pele. What we're looking for is a better player to come in and replace Callum McGregor, or one equally as good. Martin O'Neill didn't trust anybody. He dropped all the players, brought in all the second string players, but yet he still had to put Callum McGregor out. So that tells me that there's a huge issue with our recruitment policy. If this player cannot be rested for 5 minutes, so that's why, you look and the board, have to take responsibility, but they don't. The Rangers board came out and apologised, before when they brought in Danny Roll, they came out and said, and they got rid of, a couple of people. We didn't act during the COVID season. We lost, we failed, to do 10 in a row, and that was a tough season to watch from a dodgy stream. And we kind of thought, well, we've moved on now. We're in a good place. I actually thought stupidly when we bought Engels and Adamida that I said, we're now paying the money that we paid back when Matt O'Neill was manager first time. And Matt McGlone said to me in the podcast, he said, no, he said that they're one-offs, And I said, no, I think we're going to be in the market now for, we're going to speculate a little more money to get them, rather than buying in bulk and hoping one of them works. We're going to get in, a bit more quality, And Matt's a wily old fox, and Matt was right and I was wrong. I bought into it. I bought into that we were progressing because, I was in Munich. What a night. What a disappointment, but what a night. And then from then, Ciaran, it's just been a downhill spiral. But hopefully, Martin can, relive those fantastic, times watching Celtic and get one or two players in, and starting tomorrow, closing that gap on Hearts.
Yeah, you touched on the Martin O'Neill piece. One of the things, and I named it earlier, European football being in our DNA. I remember walking out of the Feyenoord home game in December 23, and while technically on paper it was a nothing game, it was we were gone at that stage. We won, and I was elated because it had been 10 years since we had last won a European home game. And this was a record. This was almost a noose round us that I'd really struggled with. The fact that we haven't won a knockout game of European football since Barcelona in 2004. And I've actually a great photo of myself and yourself outside the new camp that night, would you believe? That has been something that I'm acutely aware of. So I'd love to see us kick off these group stages, win a knockout game, and put that record to bed. It's something I would dearly love. It's a small piece, but it has been a stain on us, and I think it was certainly a stain on Alwa's tenure. That throughout his tenure, we had never won a knockout game of European football. You know that has been something that has hugely. I suppose been in frame for myself. While we have enjoyed incredible domestic success, and they are the days and nights domestically, cup days, league games that I have absolutely lived for. And when I'm an old man, there are days I look back on and treasure. But I have to say, if we need to kick on, we need to be moving on in Europe, and we need to be winning knockout games. And we've seen other clubs. Let's be very honest. Not too far from Celtic Park, have an ability to do it season after season over the last number of years. So I dearly love this. It's set up ideally for us now. Let's be honest, we're against a team who are out of the competition, straightforward, win and we qualify. You know, I know there's permutations around a draw, but the results go our way. I don't think a draw is going to be enough. Win and we qualify on Thursday coming. That's where it's at. I had my young lad over that day, so I have to say we've the telly tomorrow. Unfortunately, I won't be in Tynecastle like so many other great Celtic men who haven't got tickets and stuff. But listen, I can't wait for next Thursday. Celtic Park under the lights. Just wouldn't it really be an incredible few days if we could win tomorrow? I don't see it happening. An announcement that thankfully the absurd ban on the Green Brigade is lifted, and we head into another European night under Martin O'Neill, under the lights, potentially making a little bit of European history, hopefully. I don't see it, but you know what? It's Saturday afternoon. Let's be a bit positive.
Well, we had a week from hell, Ciaran. That Roma week, and the cup final. So we had an absolute week from hell. Let's hope we can have a week that the gods will look down on us, and we will get these vital results. I'm sure the players, will be tired. I could see you, Matt, having to use a number of subs, to get the energy. But hard to missing a few players too. But they've had a week to prepare for the game. They're in a good place. Us not so much. But you know what? No matter what, the likes of yourself and the Naomh Padraig bus, that'll be on the road to Celtic Park for many years, no matter what the results are.
It will. I'll give you a small story. Last season, we my young lad, I do a bit of coaching with my young lads GA team, and we booked them on the Hibs game before Christmas last season. And the ferry was cancelled just prior to the game. So the group rebooked to the Dundee game, which was this weekend last year, if you remember. And we were the only bus that pulled up to Celtic Park, having left at midnight. And the game was called off, would you believe, 3 hours before the game. The group haven't booked since. It's a large group, a number of kids and stuff, but the group have rebooked for the Falkirk game next Sunday. So if there's any weather gods out there, there's some dodgy storms to come. I'm dearly hoping it's not a hat trick of mishaps. So you said a week from hell now, in relation to that, certainly was in December. A win at Tynecastle tomorrow, a win on Thursday night, and at least get this Trinity Gales group over the line that they can see the game next Sunday will be a really, really positive Celtic week, hopefully.
Ciaran, it's always a pleasure. Don't leave us so long to come back on the podcast. Thank you very much. I know you're a busy man. You do so much in the community and so much in the GAA, and so I know your time is tight. So and you have to spend time with your family as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Andrew. Great to see you.